Hello, welcome to UUK Innovation and Growth webcast. My name is Greg Wade.
And I'm Kevin Richardson from the Higher Education Funding Council for England.
Welcome, Kevin. The topic that we have is HEFCE, the European Structural Investment Funds. That's a potentially huge topic. Could you narrow it down a bit for us?
Well, okay. I mean, we're looking to the next meeting of the National Committee, Greg.
Yeah.
And I think it's a really important meeting coming forward. It's second formal meeting. Yeah. We're now in early December. The meeting, I think, is on the 16th. Mm-hmm. We're expecting the papers to be circulated shortly.
Yeah.
And I think it was a pivotal point in the implementation of the programme. I think there's a number of areas that perhaps universities need to be looking out for from a strategic perspective when the papers are circulated.
Mm-hmm. So, what do you think we should be looking out for?
Well, I think the first and most obvious one is to see how well the programme is progressing as we know in the implementation phase. We saw a few months ago that certainly in the initial round of outline applications, the volume of applications, particularly in the ERDF programme, generally was extraordinarily high for this stage of a 7-year programme. Yeah. That was a very positive story that could be told at that stage.
Yeah, and we have seen quite a big leap in the numbers of universities.
Yeah, exactly. We saw that in a recent survey which UUK did a few weeks ago, Greg. But we're looking to see how the level of penetration and absorption has actually gone since the summer months, when of course we've had the big funding calls in the autumn. And if we're looking, I think the pivotal ones for me, I think would be the business development objective and the low carbon economy objective, and indeed the European Social Fund as a whole. And I'll come on to the reasons why shortly. I think those are the bellwether objectives within the programme, where we need to identify the progress and identify what else and what can be done differently.
Okay. So how is the uptake?
I think the business development objective is an interesting one because, of course, it's primarily a revenue-based objective. And of course we've seen lots of pressure on revenue budgets over recent months and leading up to and into the spending review. And I think that one will come under some pressure in terms of spend. I think we're likely to see the closure of the Growth Accelerator Programme and the Manufacturing Advice Service. And in many local areas, local partnerships wish to use that cash as match funding. And indeed, many of those applications are headed towards approval at the moment, so there may need to be a bit of a handbrake on those. I think we'll also perhaps need to think about, bearing in mind this general trend moving away from grants towards loans. How is the programme development in terms of the use of private sector cash as match funding? And I think the government put out some very useful guidance over the course of the summer. But of course there's been experience in some parts of England about how to make that work, whereas in other parts that experience wasn't there because of different arrangements. So I think that issue will be certainly of interest. And similarly on the European Social Fund side of things, the changes that we're seeing in terms of the government's approach to adult skills, to the future of the work programme, which I think from the spending review is to be reformatted or reconfigured in 2017. We're also looking at change the cuts to the adult skills, but also the devolution of significant influence at least over the skills budgets.
You mentioned devolution. Could you sort of tease out how the devolution agenda is impacting upon ESIF?
I mean, we've seen the first few devolution deals now, and I think in those, there's a very clear indication in the ones we've seen is that the government intends to establish intermediate bodies. And I don't wish to get into the technicalities, but basically what it means is a much stronger degree of influence and decision making at the local level by the new combined authorities. And whilst universities, I think, aren't necessarily overly concerned about the machinery behind the process, and I think as long as universities believe there's a strong partnership in place, and there's that transparent process and the partnership on making those decisions together, universities be quite relaxed. I think where universities might be a little bit concerned is ensuring that there's no delay ensuring that we keep up the momentum, particularly in the innovation objective,
Yeah.
and to ensure with others that where an intermediate body is in place, it has the capacity to do the job.
Yeah.
And I think that's more important.
Now, something more specific. Can you tell me what sustainable urban strategies are?
Well, as part of the programme, there is an option which has been taken up in some parts of England that parts of the programmes can be directed towards what a sustainable urban development strategy, which requires a bottom-up approach with local partnerships to address issues of community development, community cohesion, social inclusion, but in the wider context of trying to make a more integrated approach with funding from a number of different objectives and indeed different funds.
Okay.
And I think universities have a role to play here in terms of their knowledge of, what some people would call the grand societal challenges. So climate change, ageing, and carbon reductions, issues relating to health and local growth. So it'll be interesting to see how universities are being engaged in the development of these sustainable strategies at the local level.
Yeah, because there are a lot of topics that will touch on their expertise.
Yes, of course, yeah.
You talked about changes in funding and moving from grants to loans, etc. Are there other changes to funding?
Really interesting announcement in the spending review, actually, Greg, where the government has announced that across most of what would be seen as the Northern Powerhouse area, there will be a single and very large Northern Investment Fund.
Right.
Now, for the techies amongst us, it used to be called Jeremy.
Okay.
It's a very large integrated approach to providing loan and equity finance for businesses to grow. It'll cover the whole of the north, with the exception of the northeast area, my home patch, which will have its own programme. It'll be interesting to see how that's going to be constructed, how it's going to be governed, and more importantly, how it's going to be designed to provide an important source of finances for businesses to either be established or to grow. And of course, many of those businesses have relationships with universities. So how can we best ensure that as universities work with businesses, they can encourage and at least make those businesses aware of the opportunities of this new investment fund? Because it has been shown over the course of the past few years that these funds, properly designed and managed, can be very, very successful indeed.
Yes. I think that's a very helpful guide through a lot of particular topics of interest. Now, in terms of, we've spoken about the agenda for the PMC, but the governance structure doesn't just include the PMC, it also includes the national subcommittees that were proposed. And before I ask you to give us an update on those, I would say to colleagues who are watching who've had their names on a waiting list and a proposal list for the membership of these national subcommittees for some time, we haven't forgotten about you, and we are still plugging away with promoting your involvement. But where do you think we are with those national subcommittees?
Well, we started off, Greg, talking about, I think, two things. One is the overall level of uptake in the programme, which I think generally is pleasing. We've also talked about devolution and what that might mean for how the programme is managed in the future. Both of those things, I think, impact upon what the government departments may wish to do about the future of the national committees. As you know, the national committees haven't met yet. They were due to meet in December, and I understand that's been put back early in the new year. So I think we're looking for some indication from the government departments, what we techies call the managing authority, to give us a flavour of what they see their continuing functions and their continuing form. Following their discussions, I understand, with the partners in the European Commission. So I think we need to see some movement, but the structure may be somewhat different to what was originally proposed. I don't know. But we need to see an update, I think.
Yes, and they need to marry their discussions with the European Commission with what's happening at the local level.
Exactly. I can understand why there's a delay, but...
Yes. Okay.
There's a busy agenda on the 16th of December.
It is. And as usual, people will recognise my colleague James Ransom when he does a webcast briefing of the exact papers, and we'll also do a follow-up after the meeting to report back on what has been discussed and the key decisions. And just one other item to update colleagues on. A big thank you to Professor Julian Crampton from Brighton, who was our nominee on the PMC. As he's retiring, he's now been replaced by Professor John Latham from Coventry, so we'll be working closely with John. But in the meantime, thank you, Kevin.